I think the possibilities are kind of endless. I think it really depends on the continued appetite for fans to show up and see more of these stories.
It has now become practically an expectation that any sequel, reboot or adaptation of any creative entity will result in some kind of catastrophic, propaganda-infested intersectional car crash monstrosity that alienates the fans, hemorrhages money and diminishes or even destroys the franchise. We all know the drill by now. Company makes wild boasts about how great the next game/show/movie will be. Everybody sees warning signs and red flags that it will be a woke pile of trash. Company releases woke pile of trash. Everybody hates it. The actors/writers/directors/showrunners/developers go on social media and accuse all their critics of being white supremacists, racists, homophobes, bigots and transphobes. All goodwill, brand reputation and franchise value is destroyed. Rinse and repeat. This is beyond being a familiar story now. It's become the standard routine. In fact, creative projects are now garnering praise for no other reason than they are not intersectional dumpster fires of critical race theory and woke drivel. It is a phenomenally maladaptive business practice when you think about it. Make something that you know does not align with your target audience. Brace yourself for said audience to become predictably and justifiably antagonised. Blame the audience for the terrible reviews and appalling reception. Take no personal responsibility for your failures, but attack your loyal customers instead. It's like an abused, developmentally stunted child trying to feed plastic sweet wrappers to the pet dog, and then hitting it repeatedly in the fucking head with a toy car when the dog refuses to eat them. This kind of corporate conduct is so dysfunctional and nonsensical, it could easily be considered as a form of pathological self-harm. Consider The Last of Us 2. This franchise was a financial goldmine. The original game was an iconic example of the perfect mix of gameplay and storytelling. It featured two of the most liked characters in video game history, told an amazing story of adversity, heroism and morality. So what did they do with the sequel? Obviously, because modernity, they bent over backwards to fucking destroy everything about the franchise that everyone loved, and replaced it with a bizarre lecture about lesbian relationships, how white straight men are either shit, weak or expendable, kill off the hero in the first act, get the other main character to disrespect him and treat him like a simp, promote a steroidal androgynous he-woman to dispatch him, and then resolve the story by having the child's sidekick show frankly more compassion to the person who killed her father figure than she showed to her fucking father figure. Predictably, everyone hated it. Shocking surprise. But instead of apologising, changing tack or rethinking this master plan of utter stupidity, they doubled down and attacked their critics. Everyone was apparently now a homophobic, transphobic bigot, or some shit. And then they got their lawyers in and started attacking content creators by abusing the DMCA process. And incidentally, it was noted that many of the progressive video game YouTube channels quietly turned a blind eye to this DMCA abuse. And this is frankly the standard blueprint these days, and it makes very little sense at a surface level. Battlefield Vagina. Everyone was gagging for a decent Battlefield sequel, and the common sense thing to do was to make a well-polished FPS game like the previous ones, only a bit different. Lots of shooting, lots of blowing shit up, lots of fun to be had. They could have dialed this one in. Too easy, right? Of course it was. Instead, they rewrote World War II history, disrespected the legendary heroes of Telemark, and front and centre, there was a disabled female frontline commando winning the war single-handedly. Literally and figuratively. And with just her Captain Hook prosthetic, plucky attitude and Native American face paint, I didn't understand that bit either, she storms the beaches of Normandy along with her cohort of historically out of place, diverse soldiers, facing off against the female Nazi enemy. It was a fuck farm, and apparently everyone who thought the game was a joke was a fucking bigot. They said, if you don't like it, then don't buy it. And the internet responded with, challenge accepted. Wolfenstein Youngblood. Everyone likes the Wolfenstein franchise. How easy it would be to make a successful sequel. I mean, people even like the shit sequel. So what to do? I don't know. Make a video game where the heroes are two emotionally bankrupt, spandex wearing, juvenile murdering tarts who in practically every known metric are more repugnant than the fucking Nazis that they are murdering. Far Cry 6. Making a bad Far Cry sequel in the post-Far Cry 3 era requires quite a bit of effort, frankly. The bar has dropped so low these days. But worry ye not, Ubisoft can fix that shit right up for you with Far Cry 6. The quintessentially proto-Marxist sequel where you get to play the role of someone so fucking stupid that you fall in with a crowd of communist rebels, socialists and identity political whingers in order to liberate an offensively stereotypical tropical island from the dude who is seemingly far less sadistic than the alleged heroes of the game. And you do this by basically murdering everyone. But as you well know, this is not confined to video games. The Witcher franchise, once a legendary video game, a legendary book series, now a legendary story about lady witches, where the main hero is practically a fucking sidekick. The first episode of season 2 is a lecture about sexual abuse and consent, and it boasted armour designed to look like shriveled scrotums, to belittle the patriarchy. A TV show that was so bad that the main actor, who was a die-hard fan of the books, the video games, and the lore, a guy who fought tooth and nail to get this role, well, even he walked away because the TV series was such an utterly dreadful betrayal of the fanbase. Cock Rings of Power, once a legendary story about elves, wizards, and those little hobbits. Now it's a story about how white men are ineffective, dishonest, or just plain evil. We do at least get to see Lenny Henry getting an acting job. That was nice. Not that he can act. Personally, I thought Morphoid Clark was delightful. She has a lot of sexual qualities that I find profoundly alluring. She's miserable, scowling, sneering, grumpy, foul-tempered, unreasonable and ungrateful. What can I say? We all have a type, I guess. Some people like women to talk dirty to them in the sack, but I've always preferred women that grumble all the time. The list obviously doesn't stop there because the issue is endemic to the entertainment industry in these strange times. Willow, Call of Duty Vanguard, Battlefield 20 fucking fuck, Star Wars, Star Trek, She-Hulk, Little Mermaid, Prey, Cowboy Bebop, Stargate Origins. A movie so obnoxious that I might even consider reviewing it. The list goes on. Yet all the while this insanity is occurring, there will be the occasional exception that proves the rule, and someone will release something that is not a pile of woke shite, and everyone will love it. Reacher, Top Gun Maverick, Kingdom Come Deliverance, Days Gone, The Tomorrow War. And it's interesting now I mention those 5 things, because 3 of them have actually in some way been on the receiving end of cancel culture. Now surely these giant multi-billion-dollar entertainment corporations are smart enough to look at the facts and figure out what is going on, right? Right? Woke shit is disliked. Not woke shit is liked. It's plain as day. but they just don't seem to be getting the memo, and if they are rolling it up into a tube and snorting cocaine through it. So this all begs the question, why do giant entertainment corporations keep relentlessly making product that everyone with 9 fucking brain cells, 1 eye and a basic grasp of common sense could reliably predict well in advance will be a total train wreck? Why do they insist on getting woke and going broke time after time? They're in it for the money, right? They know this formula will produce train wrecks, right? Yet as sure as shit sticks to the inside of a car window, they are repeating this failed process like suddenly the next ridiculous video game rammed full of identity politics and LGBTQ+ virtue signalling is going to miraculously become the breakthrough success, despite all the previous failures that prove otherwise. Before I go any further, I need to qualify a few things. I am not legally qualified to give political advice, and if that is what you were looking for, you should seek a trained professional. I am politically not aligned with anyone, primarily because I think all pure ideologies are usually inflexible, impractical and prone to zealotry. That and the fact that I think that nearly all politicians are corrupt scumbags. And all political parties are a seething, festering hovel of corruption. I believe in general principles like liberty, freedom of speech, compassion and equality, of opportunity, but not outcome. I don't like racism, and I think men and women are equally worthless. I personally think a healthy society has lots of different views and opinions. Through rational debate, we should hammer out our differences and periodically elect worthy citizens to represent us with good governance. Through the wondrous practice of democracy. You know, real democracy. Not the new version of democracy, where nobody can account for where hundreds of thousands of fucking ballots came from and the person who is in charge of the election actually won it.
Do you want a governor whose entire platform boils down to being a sore loser? Or a governor who will get the job done for Arizona?
The extremes of any political view or spectrum is usually populated by angry people, and I am perfectly happy to follow my general principles, whilst eating popcorn and watching other, better informed people than myself have heated debates about politics. Or failing that, I'll just sit there and watch the world burn. I do, however, have a very low tolerance of woke, progressive politics and the scourge of intersectional theory-driven neo-Marxist tyranny. It's a strange form of totalitarianism which is practically becoming mainstream. So whilst I can't really say I support any particular position universally, I am universally suspicious of the ideological wokery and lunacy I'm seeing in ascendancy in the West. I don't mind if other people want to believe in that shit. My issue is, I don't think anyone has the right to try and force me to comply or align with it. Obviously, because I don't have pronouns in my bio, I am periodically accused of various forms of isms and prejudices, but actually I am a frighteningly benign and tolerant man. Racism and prejudice is a wasteful and nonsensical way to carry on, and it makes no sense. I went to 21 Kiloton Science Lab and figured out a way of proving this using logic. Look at China and Taiwan. Two vastly different cultures with entirely different ways of life, habits, social systems and beliefs, but you could argue that they are essentially genetically identical. Because the Taiwanese are the Chinese, who fled China during the revolution. It's obviously a little bit more complicated and nuanced than that, but you see my point. They are physically the same people, only separated, and now they have two entirely different cultures. If you want evidence that judging people based on race is a fucking ludicrous thing to do, well, this is as close as you can get to empirical evidence that you can actually observe in the real world. It's a giant natural experiment. I mention all of this because these days, whenever anyone stands up and says, I don't like this woke shit, someone automatically comes along and points the finger and says something like, you must be a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist then. No, I am fucking not. I think saving the unicorns and setting up sustainable rainbow farms is a lovely idea. Seriously, I think it's rather nice that a lot of people these days are concerned about the welfare of all peoples, in principle at least. Though that's frequently not how it actually plays out on the ground.
I think you're a nice woman.
But sadly, a lot of this well-intentioned stuff like racial equality, sexual equality, equal opportunity legislation, and equality in the eyes of the law isn't where this party ended. All this early social justice stuff was brilliant. But revolutionaries never really put their rifles down, and once concepts like environmentalism become basically an industry, it just kept wanting more. Because hey, why abandon a good gig if the research grants and the sponsorship money is still flowing? Because once everybody starts getting paid for this shit, nobody wants to walk away when they've got what they want. So now instead of environmentalism we have environmental social justice, environmental reparations, and now they want to introduce a carbon tax when you use your fucking credit card. This all started out with righteous intentions and did lots of good in the world, but the march towards utopian social justice never stopped, and now we're at the point where people in the USA are seriously demanding that wealth and property be stripped from white people and given to the deserving. And that worked out so well in places like China, Russia, and Zimbabwe. The purpose of this rant about the state of woke politics is this. I wanted to pose one very simple question. If entertainment corporations are very literally bound by law to make profit, what in God's name possesses them to produce titles that will clearly fail, as if promoting progressive politics is the priority? And making money is only of secondary concern. That's pretty strange, right? Corporations only exist to make profit, yet for some reason they are advancing political ideologies at the expense of their prime directive. When dealing with these kinds of issues, it's very important to avoid trying to explain things in terms of some nefarious evil forces working in unison, like some kind of secret cabal. Terms such as the powers that be, some vague ominous manifestation of the nondescript term they, or as Kanye West would argue, de Juden. They're neither useful terms, nor necessarily reflective of any real homogeneous conspiracy. And this is important because I love conspiracy theories, but when an entire society, in fact an international set of societies in the West, are all acting in concert, it's seductive to imagine some unified force in the background orchestrating events. But as is usually always the case, it's far more likely that lots of factors are driving the herd in one direction, and less likely there is some puppet master pulling strings in the background. Now don't misunderstand me, there are some puppet masters in the background. Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, George Soros. They're not really a secret cabal mind. They have fucking websites where they tell people about their batshit crazy plans to make us eat mealworms and live in pods. But these guys literally spend vast amounts of money, effort, bribes and blackmailing resources, allegedly, on steering society towards a divided dystopian hellscape so they can control and exploit people more easily. Get on Google and look it up. These guys literally invest millions, if not billions, in individuals, companies and non-profits expressly pushing a very, very specific progressive, woke, dare I say totalitarian, political message. I shit you not, as far back as Gamergate it came to light that the Bill Gates Foundation spends millions on organisations that do research into how you can modify opinions and behaviour by influencing young adults through media, such as video games. It's frankly chilling stuff. But I don't think that explains all the mechanics at play here, and it doesn't fully flesh out the whole picture. Like most things in life, once you really start to look at it, what's going on is always more complicated than simple narratives about evil villains and bad guys doing stuff. It's worth noting that nobody on the planet is so powerful they can single-handedly control the whole world by diktat. Christ, not even the most powerful man on the planet can issue decrees and make the world immediately conform to his orders.
And President Zelensky, No! To make sure the Ukrainian government can keep providing basic fundamental services to the Iranian people.
Okay, maybe that's a competency issue. I'm talking about an effective president. Okay, maybe not him either. How about this? Not even Ronald Reagan could do it. Now, I can't stress enough that this is not me telling you what the answers are. These are just the factors that I think are all part of this puzzle, and to some degree, many of these things all interact with each other and don't necessarily exist in isolation. There are definitely some feedback loops here, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the following are issues that need to be at least considered if you're trying to understand how the majority of mainstream media entertainment has ended up engaging in what can only be described as an act of collective, self-destructive, anti-consumer, political and anti-profit insanity. I asked the question, why do entertainment companies get woke and go broke and stubbornly insist on repeating the same mistakes over and over again? The education system. Invoking the spirit of Yuri Bezmenov here, I think it's fair to say that the West has been asleep at the wheel for decades, while sensible people have been focusing on fairness, freedom of speech, and other lofty principles. People of a certain ideological bent have been wasting no time infiltrating the education system in the West. Thanks to the stoic work of investigative journalists such as Project Veritas and many others, people are discovering that political activists have been deliberately and steadily insinuating themselves into the education system and carrying their woke message into schools, universities, education boards, teaching courses, nursery schools, and pretty much any other position where they can spread their political ideology.
Meet Jennifer Norris, the Director of Student Activities at the 209-year-old Trinity School in New York City. The acclaimed K-12 school is private and costs nearly $60,000 a year per student. Norris met with one of our undercover journalists where she divulges, if not brags, about how her political views impact how she performs her job at Trinity.
Is there any saving these Republican, white guys?
I think they need to go. Show Dexter.
Oh, yeah.
We just need some vigilante Dexter.
Oh, yeah.
Here's your community of targets.
The reference to a fictional serial killer aside, the statements Norris makes regarding, quote, white male Republicans are disgusting, and she is confident in her abilities to further a secret curriculum without parents knowing about it, as she and others like her rise through the ranks at Trinity trying to influence their students' political activism in a 13 students per teacher ratio.
And let's be clear here, the policy of appeasement has failed. In fact, there is a culture of fear in the education system now. Offend the woke mob and you will be out on the street. Universities tolerate protests that shut down non-progressive lecturers and speakers. They pander to the activists, and many students and academics alike are quietly going into the night rather than speaking out and potentially being cancelled, fired, or kicked out of their university. Christ, they even send staff on diversity awareness courses so they can learn to feel guilty about the very fact that they fucking exist. I could go on for hours, but in short, the education system in the West has normalised progressive politics, and they are pumping out a generation of kids who are more concerned about their pronouns than actual facts. I think it's wonderful that our education system evolved to the point where we can, as a successful Western civilization, be self-consciously aware of our past crimes and injustices. I think it's brilliant that we are no longer reading history books like they are sacred texts, and we challenge the context and interpretations of the past. The treatment of Native American Indians was deplorable, as were the injustices of the slave trade. These are a heinous blight on our civilization, and it is right that we do not forget. But teaching these things at the expense of established evidence and facts, and indoctrinating the youth with socialist and communist narratives about the past, does a disservice to them and breeds injustices in the future. When people start arguing that we need to change our curriculum because maths is apparently racist, that's a red flag, right? We are raising generations of students that complain about things like the patriarchy, but can't answer basic questions about the very topics they are protesting about. That's quite funny. Christ, we now have woketards in the US demanding reparations for all people of colour, and woketards in Europe demanding environmental reparations for developing nations. Why should Somali or Ethiopian Americans get reparations because of their racial profile, when they were not historically part of the slave trade? I mean, how do they think the slave trade actually went down? Do they think white colonialists stopped off on the coast of Africa and ran inland with a bunch of butterfly nets and caught the slaves themselves? No, they bought them from African slave markets. But nobody wants to hear about that. All this woke shit is cute, well-meaning, childish nonsense. But it suddenly becomes dangerous when people start trying to take money or medical treatment away from you based on your race. The creative arts attract people who are much more likely to be woke. Certain professions attract certain types of people, and some professions have extremely strong demographics. Science fact. About 80% of all psychology university undergraduates in the UK are female. And strangely, about 80% of all engineering university undergraduates in the UK are male. 90% of sewer cleaners are men. 86% of nurses are women. I'm allowed to say woman, right? But these demographics are reflected elsewhere. It's not a coincidence that London Soho, famous for being the theatre quarter, is also incidentally the gay quarter, with this being reflected in theatre quarters all over Europe. Coincidentally, the cutthroat world of investment banking is not overrun by progressive hippie communists who strongly promote the redistribution of wealth based on equity and not avaricious greed. Similarly, I know of not one person who runs a sales desk at any well-known international arms fairs who has pronouns in their bio, blue hair, and identifies as non-binary. It therefore should come as no fucking surprise whatsoever that the creative arts, be that writing, video games, or movies, generally attracts people on the left-leaning part of the political spectrum. Don't believe me? Well, turning up at your local creative poetry class wearing a MAGA hat will quickly demonstrate the veracity of my claims. Gatekeeping. If you want any examples of gatekeeping in the creative industries, and their wider footprint on social media, just look at Hollywood, the private communications of workers at Twitter under Jack Dorsey. Look at the personal profiles and Twitter profiles of video game journalists and developers. It's a giant rainbow flag waving orgy of virtue signalling fucking idiots, all singing the Communist Party Alphabet People anthem whilst jackbooting their way across social media. Name one conservative actor who hasn't endured constant attempts to be drummed out of the industry. Subversion is part of this progressive agenda. Don't believe me? Just look at Black Lives Matter, an organisation set up and run by a small group of self-confessed Marxist propagandists, their words not mine, that led a whole country into a year of riots, looting, murder, arson and subversion, then scooped up all the money and fucked off to spend the cash on private mansions and sex workers. leaving the black communities that did the fundraising for them scratching their heads and asking where the fuck did all their money go.
They collected $80 million. Where is that money?
It's not here. Everything looks worse than it was.
Another $200K went to escorts, BDSM workers, strippers, peep show workers, phone sex operators, and webcam performers. And then at that moment, it became personal.
This is important because these guys don't play by the rules. They don't want to discuss your differences of opinion. They want to get you fired. Just ask any Conservative or Republican who works in the creative industries. I'm sure there must be one or two. Possibly. Seriously, I've read articles from people who admit that they hide their political views at work because it would destroy their careers if they came out as openly Republican whilst working in the creative industries. Whether it be low to mid-tier game developers, story writers, administrators on social media, comic book writers, all these industries have gradually edged out the people that don't prosecute a certain political message, and they won't let you in to these industries easily unless you are on message. I mean, how many pro-Second Amendment devout Christians do you think managed to get a job at Twitter? Many of the old school creative folk have been drummed out for not being on board with the message. And we find ourselves with a creative industry overrun with minions that do not have the skill, experience, or mindset to create powerful stories. Because their stories are all about entitlement, virtue signalling, and bitterness about the patriarchy and the evils of cis white males. Don't believe me? Pick any Netflix show at random, and you will probably see what I mean. I tried to watch one today. Within the first 10 minutes I was subjected to the following. A group of old white men are ignoring warnings and thus shown as incompetent. They represent the patriarchy, get it? We're introduced to the female hero climate expert who is stunning and brave. A hunter shoots a deer in front of her and she is furious at the cruelty. The hunter is a fat white middle-aged man. Obviously. She physically attacks him, overpowers him and takes his ID to report him, and throws in a comment about shooting his dick off, just for good measure. See a pattern of identity politics forming here? And for the record, love, deers are fucking pests. If you really cared about the environment, you would be shooting them yourself. We have ended up in a situation where implicit political vetting has become an entry-level barrier to most of the mainstream creative world, a potential obstruction to promotion, and a possible grounds for your dismissal. And because of this, we have ended up in ludicrous situations where writers frequently hate the source material, creatives are more concerned with the politics and the signalling than the entertainment, and they want to transform what they are working on to reflect their own political principles, even if this comes at the expense of the story and the quality of the entertainment. This is why we get bollock armour in The Witcher. That's why the world of comics seem obsessed with turning every superhero gay or non-binary, or switching them from male to female. It's not just subverting your expectations, it's also about pure subversion. That's why we get bizarre racial topography in video games where people are frequently cast and categorised as either good or evil, competent or incompetent, righteous or morally bankrupt based on their gender, sexuality or race. And like I said, subversion is part of the plan if you're a political activist. So if you happen to break the thing you're working on by infusing it with vomitous levels of wokery, well, that's just the price of doing activist business. Just look at Kathleen Kennedy. She cared a whole lot about fourth wave feminism, bent over backwards to ridicule, belittle and character assassinate the legacy characters of the franchise, yet clearly does not have the competence, ability nor the fucks to give to make something great of her own. But this destruction of what came before is deliberate. Destroy people's heroes, topple their statues and replace them with the new paradigm's heroes who represent and embody all the qualities you are trying to promote. Even if those characters their qualities, and the entire paradigm is shit. It worked in the Cultural Revolution, right? The brute dynamic here is a simple one. People who are broadly on the right believe in free speech, plurality of opinions and individual responsibility. People who are broadly woke as fuck believe in cancel culture, censorship, silencing voices they deem to be offensive and creating safe spaces. And as we all know, safe spaces are really exclusion zones. They are locations where you are not welcome if you think differently. There is nothing inclusive about inclusivity. And that is a point that's worth stressing. Much of the vocabulary of woke politics are entirely euphemistic. The good old days of legendary writers like William Goldman, balls to the wall video game dialogue like GTA 5, missions like No Russia in Modern Warfare 2. For now, these days are gone. Do you honestly think there's anyone capable of creating, writing and getting permission to make that kind of calibre of content in today's climate? If South Park was invented tomorrow, do you think these guys would even get a pitch meeting? I fucking doubt it. On rare occasions it can still happen, but all the odds are stacked against you if you try. I'm not saying that everything in the past was better and everything in the future is worse. Personally, I'm quite glad that the black and white minstrel show got cancelled. I'm merely saying that the creative arts gatekeep their industries, and it's going to be very hard to get entry-level access these days unless you are ticking a lot of boxes, dyeing your hair the right colour, and frankly, bending the fucking knee. The fact that the creative industries now has a de facto screening infrastructure to vet out people with certain types of political views will only reinforce woke politics in the industry in the future, and concentrate it. Funding and awards bodies codify wokeness. The rules of diversity, equity and identity politics are now being codified, legislated and enshrined in rules and law. Whether it be funding from art bodies or government, tax breaks or qualifying for winning awards, the principles of woke noncery and snowflakery are now being cast in stone in the form of rules, codes and requirements. Here in the UK, BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, changed their rules to make diversity, inclusion, equity and protecting the unicorns in the name of inclusivity compulsory for certain awards. These days you'll be entirely banned from being nominated for multiple categories of award unless you can demonstrably prove you've increased representation in at least 2 of 4 of the following criteria: on-screen representation, themes and narratives, project leadership and creative practitioners, industry access and opportunities, opportunities for diversity in audience development. And this is a minimum criteria, I would note. Don't forget that more is better. Now, some of said groups might be underrepresented because they are, say, 3% of the population, or because thematically it's not a good fit. But these rules are basically saying if you're making a historical drama about an 18th century Welsh coal mining community during a strike, where all the cast are historically accurate white Welsh male coal miners, and there is no trans subplot, and the hero isn't gay, then I guess you might have to sack your entire production, writing and creative crew and diversity hire like a motherfucker, because otherwise you won't tick enough boxes to be nominated for Outstanding British Film. What I said might sound ludicrous, but those were the rules. Read them for yourself. And these kind of factors no doubt form part of their criteria for assessing funding, grants and scholarships. They have pages and pages of this shit. And lo and behold, they're now rolling this out in their video game awards too. The Oscars are also introducing the same criteria. Diversity and inclusion is now enforced in every aspect of the creative industries, from hiring policy through representation on screen to narrative themes. Every part of the creative process in film, TV and video games are having diversity, inclusivity and representation consolidated into their very administrative fabric, and if you don't follow the rules, you get frozen out. And let's not forget that the creative arts was, is, and most likely always will be the most diverse industry on the fucking planet. Short of being a prostitute or a fucking pirate. But more is better, right? Now, I personally think that all stories should be told, and we should never limit our society's ability to tell its stories, whether that be about race, injustice, religion or disability. For every Joker, there should be a "don't worry he won't get far on foot." And this all adds to the rich tapestry of our culture. When you exclude narratives and silence voices, we are all diminished, right? But not excluding is not equivalent to forced diversity and inclusion policy, because a lot of these diversity and inclusion policies are excluding a fuck of a lot of things. I would no more support regulated positive discrimination than I would jump on a flight to Nigeria and start demanding that fat white Londoners should be cast in every Nigerian movie and be represented on the crew as well. These are a rule set that we are enforcing on our society, whilst the rest of the world laughs and sniggers at us. We have become obsessed with this shit here in the West. But the real crux of these kinds of regulations is this. From the very start of the creative process, your project needs to start ticking boxes pretty damn quick, or you can say goodbye to funding and winning any major awards. ESG ratings. I don't want to dwell on this, but for those of you who don't know, the ESG rating is basically a giant bullshit accountancy scam driven by psychopathic wannabe global despots at the World Economic Forum. I thought this was some kind of dystopian sci-fi conspiracy theory until I went onto their own fucking website and read all about it. If you think Soylent Green represented a bad way to run a society, then you should check these dickheads out. The fantasy definition of the environmental, social and governance framework is that it's apparently a way of corporations to work towards a sustainable, ethical and socially responsible future in order to reap more profits and make the world a better place. Obviously, they are lying, because super rich powermongers always lie when they want you to do something that gives them your power and your money in exchange for nothing. It's very literally an accountancy scam. Corporations follow World Economic Forum rules and do ESG information reporting and pretend they give a fuck about ethics and the environment. Then they get a higher ESG rating which positively reflects on their investment rating, and they get better tax breaks, increased company value, connections and profits. But it's a big fat lie though. The people who decide your rating are associated with the World Economic Forum, and it's not based on facts. It's a cartel. It's a fake accreditation scheme. It's all about being a member of the club. And if you watch this video by Coin Bureau, it will explain what a complete scam it really is.
If you're unfamiliar with ESG, here's what you need to know. ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance. It's an investment ideology that's been pushed by asset managers like BlackRock and megabanks like Bank of America for years.
But the important thing to remember here is this. Whilst everyone is still believing the lie, corporations who play along with the ESG narrative, do all their performative woke inclusivity bullshit antics, and avoid damaging their ESG rating by not generating controversy in their video games, films or TV shows, they reap benefits. It's a giant backslapping exercise, and it's good for their stock value. As Sam Bankman-Fried rightly noted, if you are pleasing or paying off the right people, you can get a license to print money and immunity from scrutiny or regulation, as long as you don't make a public spectacle of yourself or embarrass your evil overlords. Now the ESG system might well start collapsing soon because of one simple reason. And this might shock you. Doing all this pointless woke shit is causing major corporations to hemorrhage money, and whilst business is good, they tolerate that. But if a global downturn comes and profitability is threatened, ESG might be the first thing thrown out of the fucking cab as all these corporations start tightening their belts. The important thing here is this. At the start of the video, I tried to make the point that you can't explain away everything bad in the world by blaming some shadowy cartel of evil overlords who are trying to manipulate the world using corrupt politicians and corporate leaders. Well, that's not 100% true. The World Economic Forum does kind of fit that form factor. Precisely, in fact.
I'm here with a woman who needs absolutely no introduction, but I will try anyways. Susan Wojcicki was employee number 16 at Google. She now runs YouTube.
They are the guys who praise China's social credit system. They think it's hilarious. They support central bank digital currencies, universal global real-time surveillance, and digital ID. They are sinister fucklords, and everything they support, you should oppose on principle. You know how that scowling infant somehow managed to travel from Europe to the United States without using a plane? Because some kind gentleman just happened to loan her his super yacht and sail her across the Atlantic just for good environmental public relations. Well, don't be shocked if it turns out that the World Economic Forum had something to do with that shit right there. Primary revenue streams don't necessarily come from direct sales these days. This is a strange one and particularly applies to video games. These days, AAA video game publishers make the lion's share of the profits from things other than actual direct sales of video games themselves. Promotional tie-ins, advertising tie-ins, in-game advertising, events promotion, ongoing subscriptions, secondary sales of goods and services, selling your data that they are harvesting from you, mobile games which are trading off their corporate brand, multi-billion-dollar government tax rebates, loot boxes, and microtransactions. When you really look at how companies like Activision are making their money, it's quite surprising they have any spare time left to make a proper AAA video game at all. These days it's all about services, alternative revenue, and frankly, a huge chunk of money is coming from China. So who gives a fuck if the games they release for Western audiences are a pile of sanitised woke crap? Some people would argue that they are targeting whales and not sales. And this is an interesting thought experiment, when you consider that 1 in 1,000 players are responsible for the majority of all spend on any given title, dropping thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of pounds on loot boxes, shark cards, FIFA nonsense and microtransactions in general. This raises a significant point. Perhaps, just perhaps, they are precisely trying to cater to a very small demographic of the player base, the most profitable minority. And we are all just along for the ride. In fact, perhaps judging the solvency of a AAA publisher based solely on how popular their games are and how much money they make in direct sales is an old-fashioned and retrograde way to analyse the problem. Activision made a huge deal about Modern Warfare 2022 Special Pride Edition, making over $1 billion of sales in the first week. But after development costs, commissions, server fees, maintenance, even though they're completely cheaping out on all of these things, how much of this was profit? Now consider that in 2018 Activision not only avoided all tax liabilities by shuffling billions out of the country to tax havens, but on the way out of the fucking door they snaffled up $224 million of tax credits too, and laughed all the way to the Cayman Bank. And they are no doubt pulling this kind of stunt in every territory where they have a physical footprint. Now, I'm not an accountant. Christ, I can barely fucking count. But I would love to see a detailed analysis of how much Activision actually makes and what proportion comes from actual direct sales of product from selling actual video games and selling them to gamers. Because these motherfuckers certainly appear to be making $250 million per year, pure profit, just for existing. They must be making a shitload on investments. They make vastly more money from microtransactions and mobile apps than they do from games. Plus, there's also the other revenue streams. My point is that AAA video games these days might just be a side hustle for them. They service the brand, act as a vehicle for promotion and advertising, and as long as they're keeping the super rich or gambling addicted whales happy, who gives a shit if the game is a woke pile of propaganda? It's just going to help their ESG rating and grease the wheels of the corporate cartel machine. The ideological and historical fallacy that the future will be more of the same. It's not impossible that these companies think they are appealing to the future generation of hyper-woke consumers. These ultra-corpo types always plan in decades, not release cycles. It's always tempting to look at the past, look at the present, and assume that tomorrow will just be more of the change that's been going on. History doesn't really behave that way, but you could be forgiven for thinking that because 2010 was more woke than 2000, and 2020 is more woke than 2010, naturally it's a given that the future is going to be even more woke. These kind of trajectories rarely stay static and predictable in the long term when it comes to history and society. I've long suspected that a lot of these companies just assume that the future is going to be a woke fest, and they're just working on the assumption that all the complaining gamers and viewers who don't like their progressive product will eventually be churned out of the customer base over time. There is also that famous Gamergate era quote from an industry insider talking about how the traditional gamer is a potential threat to the industry that may at some point need to be dealt with. Perhaps this process of forcing woke content on the audience is effectively the industry grooming the next generation of gamers to be compliant socialist minions, and possibly this is all a loss leader. Let's take the hit now and try and shape our future audiences by normalising this fucking woke nonsense in video games so that future gamers will consume product and not complain. Maybe they're trying to drive away the nasty, non-woke gamers and actively shape the future clients that they want to service. They are trying to appeal to woke gatekeeping reviewers and not the customers. This is a two-way street really, because on one hand, game review sites, for example, don't work the way you think they do. They trade positive coverage and positive reviews in exchange for advertising revenue. Sure, there are sometimes limits to how much they can lie, in theory, but let's not forget that mainstream review scores are sometimes entirely the opposite to what the customers think. Routinely, in fact. So initially I was going to claim that they can't lie beyond a certain point or they will destroy their credibility. But when I actually thought back to the real examples, I had to concede that fairly regularly these days publishers shart out terrible video games that everyone fucking hates, that are highly problematic or controversial because of monetization, performance, content, or because they are crushingly woke, or some combination of all of these things. Yet the mainstream reviewers respond with stunningly positive reviews across the board, almost as if they're all working in concert. Because often they are working in concert. Because mainstream video game journalists collude privately. But more of this later. There is a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship between publishers and reviewers. This is not an adversarial relationship in any way. Wherever possible, mainstream gaming media will throw their weight behind the guys with the biggest advertising budget. However, mainstream game journalism occupies a rather strange position. They are both subject to the woke mob, and at the same time, part of it. If you check their bios, profiles and backgrounds, a lot of these guys are dyed-in-the-wool activists. It's pronouns this and inclusivity that. Many literally describe themselves as activists and bleat on in their reviews about politics, diversity, gender issues and all that tiresome crap. It's a strange position to be in because on one hand they exist to promote video games, but they also can't be seen to support anti-woke rhetoric or anti-woke product. They're essentially dogs with two masters, both of which might beat them for saying the wrong thing. This is a subject which I really want to look into further, but for now let's just accept that when you release a video game, you sure as shit need to be woke enough to get approval from the progressive mainstream reviewers. Or they will pick it to death, piece by piece, like Days Gone. Or outright wage war on it, like Kingdom Come Deliverance. And let's not forget that although playing to the woke crowd is their bread and butter, if they trigger the wokerati, they can get attacked too. So they certainly can't throw their support behind a game that is, say, blatantly macho, cis, or not representative enough. So just like journalists gatekeep their own industry, they gatekeep entertainment too. And pleasing these journalists is a high priority for the corporations. Oh, and remember how I said earlier that video game journalists collude secretly to reach consensus on how to respond to video games and controversies in the video game industry? As was discovered during Gamergate, Milo Yiannopoulos revealed that hundreds of mainstream video game reviewers were all a member of a secret mailing list called Game Journo Pros, and they were literally working in concert. They were colluding together to decide on collective support or condemnation of certain games, news and people, and actively shape the narrative in the video game industry. And all of this was being run by Kyle Orland, senior reviewer at Ars Technica. But it gets worse. Because Kyle Orland, the guy who ran Game Journo Pros, who was also a key player in organising attacks and hit pieces on gamers during Gamergate, is actually the son of Martin Orland, who is an extremely well-connected figure within the US Education and Advisory Committee, working on, amongst other things, researching and influencing behaviour in the entertainment and video games industry.
So, let me get this straight. The father of the creator and leader of the Games Journal Pro list, the list that engineered the Gamers Are Dead campaign, just happens to be the senior program director of an extremely powerful educational reform organization, as well as being employed by the literal Department of Education, considering that the whole premise of this documentary has been that Common Core is a subversive tool of indoctrination meant to alter the behavior of all future generations, which in turn will drastically change the social and cultural landscape. This should raise an eyebrow on anyone who is even remotely awake. But, of course, the rabbit hole does not stop here. Maybe we could see if there are any direct connections between the Gates Foundation and Mr. Orland's organization. Oh, snap! Turns out that when Orland became the director at WestEd in 2007, that's when the grants from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation started pouring in. From 2007 until July 2014, they received $2,987,668. But what's really interesting is on August 27th, the day before the Gamers Are Dead articles came out, they got a single grant for $3.45 million, larger than all the previous grants combined. And what's even stranger, that grant in specific wasn't discovered until by me today, even though all the previous ones were discovered months ago, because it was mysteriously miscategorized so that it doesn't show up when searching the US like all the other ones do. It's almost as if they didn't want us to find it.
So yes, when I was talking earlier about shady cabals secretly working in the background to exert their influence on the entertainment industry, well, one of the key players, corporate shills and anti-gamer shitheels in the video game journalism community during Gamergate, well, his father, amongst other things, has worked for a foundation that received grants from Bill Gates to investigate influencing and manipulating behaviour and social beliefs via the use of video games. So not only are these guys fucking bent, corrupt and colluding with each other to be on message about the politics in video games, but if you check the receipts, it turns out that there is a paper trail and a financial trail all the way from the top players in the World Economic Forum all the way down to the key figures in the mainstream video game reviewer community. So if you've ever considered making a tinfoil hat and becoming a conspiracy theorist, I reckon now would be a pretty good time to embrace those life choices. Cancel culture. Cancel culture is like a digital plague of locusts on the land, unleashed by the global connectedness of social media and amplified by algorithms that only serve to signal boost and cause division, used by companies that only care about money, frequently operated by grassroots employees that despise normalcy, tradition, conservative values, and anyone else that doesn't have blue hair and a furry fetish. If you release a video game and trigger the woke horde, it is highly likely that the mainstream media, which itself is largely aligned with the political left, will fall into synchrony with the angry pitchfork-waving woke masses and applaud and signal boost their outrage. Justified or not. True or fake. Mainstream reviewers, terrified of falling foul of the mob, will moderate their reviews, sometimes retrospectively, adjusting them in order to reflect the fury and outrage about the injustices in the game, real or perceived. Although off the top of my head, I can't think of a single example of any video game genuinely worthy of the woke hate levelled against it. And let's not forget that once this ball is rolling, every worthless virtue signalling fuck on the internet will want to pile in, because it's an opportunity to boost their own self-righteous credentials. Idiots like Alyssa Milano, Mark Ruffalo, and Kevin fucking Smith. One complaint about isms, inclusivity, or exclusion on Twitter can lead to developers releasing entire patches to modify video game content. Publishers roll out non-binary or trans player characters to win brownie points to appease the woke mob, and most have removed male and female gender choices in the character creation screen altogether. And this is the point. People are terrified of the mob. The reviewers are terrified of the mob. The mainstream press is terrified of the mob. The advertisers and sponsors are really terrified of the mob. They regularly cancel their own for stepping out of line. Everyone is appeasing this phantasm of the internet, this whirling dervish of woke stupidity and hate, instead of telling them to fuck off. Everyone is practicing policies of appeasement, pampering, kowtowing, apologising, desperately trying to win favour with this self-organising emergent property of the internet that has no leader, no coherent command structure, and nobody you can reason with. Personally, I've always followed the doctrine of don't negotiate with terrorists, but even if you wanted to, there is no power figure with which to negotiate. Therefore, all efforts to stay on the right side of this spiteful rabble is always just one angry cry of outrage away from unravelling in front of your eyes. And I can't stress this enough, there's no dealing with the woke mob. When they run out of obvious targets, they turn on their own members for not being woke enough. It's like leaving 10 rats in a cage without any food. Sooner or later, you're gonna come back, and they will have eaten one of the others. They tried to cancel Henry Cavill just for dating a conservative. They accused Chris Pratt of being a white supremacist, just for holding a Gadsden flag. A symbol that incidentally represents the fight against colonial oppression, FY fucking I. It's got fuck all to do with white supremacy. And there are developers and video game journalists who have had to walk away from the industry or hide in the shadows because their prior opinions on Gamergate renders them toxic to any project they work on because it might be cancelled because of their very presence. Cancel culture is like a really angry hornet's nest. It only takes one of them to sting you and they release pheromones, which makes them all attack you. But you will have more luck trying to appease a hornet's nest than appeasing cancel culture. So good luck with that. Modern management structure means most executives don't have a fucking clue what they are doing. Once upon a time, in a land long forgotten, there was this mad idea that people who ran a fucking shoe company might be expected to have half a fucking clue about what a shoe is. They didn't need to actually be a master cobbler, but if they are hired to run a shoe factory, they would be expected to have at least some working knowledge of the industry, or maybe spend some time on the factory floor as part of their induction? It's a radical and subversive idea, I know, but being absolutely clueless about the products your company trades in will put the senior management at a disadvantage, and they will be held hostage by their underlings because they exist in a vacuum of expertise. These days, corporate management largely exists as an entirely separate tier of the company, and it is incredibly rare to have anyone at the highest levels of management that know a damn thing about what their company actually produces and how it works. The execs are money men and lady men. They are fiscally minded, they know about shareholders, market share, monetization, sucking tax credits out of governments, hiding money in offshore banks, and developing emerging markets. They frequently know nothing about the video games, movies and TV shows that their companies actually produce. So what happens when execs who know nothing about their product are forced to rely entirely on the advice of underlings that are more interested in prosecuting a political agenda than making something that is quintessentially good? And remember, they're getting advice from people in an industry that is gatekeeping itself. So they're automatically getting advice from people who themselves are politically biased. Well, I'll tell you what happens. Battlefield vagina happens. Because Patrick Soderlund is a professional executive and businessman, and not a developer. The Last of Us 2 happens. Call of Duty Vanguard happens. Brie Larson's entire career happens.
I am committed to self-improvement, and I work at being the best person that I can be and using this platform for as much good as I can. But it doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes, but I'm very comfortable with that and allowing myself to learn from those mistakes.
Yeah, I'm pretty accountable and responsible for my own life, at any rate.
Now this might surprise you, but I actually think that the people running a giant entertainment corporation should know more about corporations than they do about entertainment. Let's be honest. If you run a shoe factory, you don't literally need to know every type of tack and leather sole construction by heart. But you do at least need to know what a fucking shoe is. You need to know that people have feet, 2 of them, mostly, generally a mirror image of the other, and people walk around on them, head at the top, feet at the bottom, and the shoes go on the fucking things with the toes wiggling at the end. A lot of the people running major entertainment corporations neither know nor care about any form of entertainment that doesn't involve cocaine, private yachts, murdering prostitutes, and visiting Epstein Island, allegedly. I'm not saying they have to rise up through the ranks exclusively, but being entirely ignorant of the industry is problematic, especially when the only people you've got giving you advice are woke fucking cretins. Essentially, companies like EA, Disney, Netflix, Amazon, Warner, Activision and Paramount may well frequently be being held to ransom because of their own management ignorance. Jeff Bezos pissed away $500 million on cock rings of power, not because he's necessarily stupid, but because he was ignorant of the content and material. He hired the best experts he could find, ergo, the writers, showrunners and directors that had not been drummed out of the industry by the gatekeepers. And he told said pre-vetted, woke-approved industry activists, "Make me something good." And all the activists, wokerati and neo-socialist feminists collectively smirked at each other and said, "Yeah, we can do that for you." Only their version of good is our idea of fuck farm, and a $500 million catastrophe was born. It's like Stalin's purges when you think about it. Once you've imprisoned or executed all your military leaders based on political affiliation, you suddenly find that you have an army of loyal, eager to please, servile, incompetent fucking idiots. Jeff Bezos did nothing wrong, in this context at least. The problem was not what he did, it's who he asked. He could have asked a host of different creative minds to do the same thing and it wouldn't have turned into a fucking woke disaster. He could have asked Peter Jackson, Christopher McQuarrie, or Fuck, Mike Judge would have done a better job. The point is that he was clueless about the topic, and he was surrounded by clueless people who were also desperately woke. You don't need to be an actual comedian to promote a comedy night. You need to be a promoter who knows a bit about comedy, in the same way that you don't need to be a story writer and a game developer to be the CEO of a video game company. But it helps. And conspicuously, there is a very strong correlation between executive management who used to be game devs and games that actually turned out incredibly well. Kingdom Come Deliverance. My point, whilst being vague, esoteric and perhaps hyperbolic, is this. When the king only surrounds himself with idiots for advisors, only stupidity will ensue. Well, I guess it's time we cinch this furry up with cable ties and throw it in the canal. I cannot stress enough that I have absolutely no issue with woke entertainment in principle. I have a problem with everything being made woke. I have a problem with all my favourite franchises becoming woke. I have a problem with people gradually turning all forms of popular entertainment into a shitcake propaganda lesson, lecturing me about issues that I could not give two shits about. If someone wants to make a video game about furry groomers and bestiality lovers, where everyone is non-binary and there's not one single white guy in the whole video game, knock yourself out. You do you. I will stand up for your rights of freedom of expression, even if you creep me the fuck out. And you make horribly shit video games. Plurality and diversity in opinion and expression is a truly wonderful thing, as long as you're not breaking the law. But let me have my games too. Don't come over here and smash my toys and try and force me to play with your dollies. And let's not fuck around, because I mean that very literally. As details have leaked out about Last of Us 2, Star Wars, The Witcher series and things like comic books, a common theme is that writers and creators have disdain for the source material and delight in the opportunity to destroy the original characters and beloved themes and replace them with trolling progressive characters that align with their woke agenda. Or as they would euphemistically say, reimagined for a modern audience. And said modern audience is clearly progressive snowflakes. Look, the world is a better place because Brokeback Mountain exists. Gay couples everywhere can snuggle up on their slightly kitsch sofas and feel a sense of relatable emotion. Having a bit more love and peace in the world can only be a good thing, right? But there doesn't have to be gay fucking cowboys in every movie, surely. Gay movie sections have been a thing since the days of video stores and VHS tapes. It's not exactly cutting edge or revolutionary. Everyone is over it, and nobody minds. What they mind is the arbitrary cross-spectrum inclusivity and people's efforts to infuse it into all entertainment all of the time. Imagine if Netflix had made Top Gun Maverick. More than half the pilots would be female, all the male pilots would be ineffective, the white guys would be evil or racist, there'd be at least one gay relationship and probably a couple of trans pilots, all of whom were no doubt being oppressed by their cis white male base commander. Fuck, they would probably even subvert the plot so as to make the Americans the bad guys, and the story arc would be the pilots gradually coming to the realisation that they should switch sides and start fighting for the Russians. I'm sure someone at Netflix would probably think this was a brilliant concept for a movie. And I don't blame them. I've been studying the ways of the woke activist subversive writer and reckon by now I've got a good handle on how it all works. But my serious point is that it's fine to make movies like that. But not all movies need to be like that. And enshrining that all movies be like that using legislation is fucking tyranny. Forcing people to say a certain thing is just as bad as silencing them, and maybe that's a critical point about freedom of expression and free speech. Silencing voices is tyranny, but coercing people, especially creative people, writers and game developers, to promote certain political messages on pain of punishment or sanction, well, that's just as tyrannical. One way to think about this whole issue is to consider the end-to-end production process of a film, TV show or a video game. Where at one end you have the young enthusiastic student, and at the other end the final product, being scrutinised by the reviewers and audience. At every point along the end-to-end process there are woke influences. In the education system, the hiring policies, the company diversity policies, the industry gatekeeping, the woke imperatives in the creation process, the box ticking for the awards, the pressure of not being cancelled, of conforming to the expectations of your woke colleagues, how your career prospects are influenced by your politics, how your company is chasing ESG ratings, and all the time knowing that the end product will be reviewed by a bunch of woke tards, and it has to be the sort of entertainment that will pass muster with those Stasi woke police who themselves are afraid of being cancelled. At every point along the production cycle, pressure is being put on the people, the creative decisions and the executives to pamper to woke principles. Some of this woke pressure is exerted by external factors, and a lot of this wokeness is propagated internally by the very participants involved, and it's all a sick, virtueless cycle where everyone is part of the problem, pretending to go along with it or being cancelled. It kind of reminds me of what it's like to live in a totalitarian regime, only in microcosm. And maybe a little bit, it reminds me of Invasion of the fucking Body Snatchers. Once I listed out all the factors at play in the modern entertainment environment, I came to a rather shocking conclusion. The issue is not one of why so much modern entertainment is woke shit. The issue here is really this. How in fuck's name do you manage to make something that is not woke shit these days? When you consider the minefield you have to negotiate just to not piss anyone off, and comply with all the woke mandates, it's a miracle that anything gets made that isn't utter wank snowflake propaganda. Between cancel culture, industry guidelines, gatekeeping, funding restrictions, qualifying for awards, keeping the reviewers happy, keeping your promotional partners and advertisers happy, I am frankly impressed that there are any video games, TV shows and movies getting made that are actually watchable, let alone good, because all external and internal forces acting on a creative product are pushing it towards the end result. And that end result is woke. Well, I would love to stay and talk all day, but I need to head off and work on my new movie script. I'm sure someone from Netflix will be calling me any day now. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.